Okay, so this is episode 3 of our series on 1 Timothy 2, verse 12. And the point we are making is that Paul is condemning Jesus' rebellion from Pharisee practices towards women. So I think we've shown you how the Pharisees view the Genesis passage, but we want to also know, what did the Genesis passage also say? And Paul is relying upon something in that Genesis passage for his doctrine in 1 Timothy 2:12, right? He's going to give us 2 reasons why this has to be so, because Eve was created second from Adam. That's supposedly a good reason that there's patriarchy, which doesn't follow. But the second one is, he wasn't deceived, Adam wasn't deceived, and she alone was. It was her transgression alone. So we're going to go after that today. But we still want to understand the Genesis passage about, are there curses, or they're just simply facts of life that you're allowed to resist. Okay. So so anyway, here we go, getting back into it. So the verse at issue in Genesis 3:16 is where God says, "And to your husband will be your desire, and he will rule over you." Okay, this is not spoken to the man; it's spoken to the woman as a fact of life with no directions. Not told how to handle that, but it's not a curse either, and it's not labeled a curse. So there's a whole myth that Phariseeism created. And how do we know it's Phariseeism? Because we can look at the Talmud. They create their curses on Eve, as we shall see. And so I wanted to get the most recent Jewish leading translation, Friedman Torah, page 24. He says, "And your desire will be for your man, and he'll dominate you." So I think the word is essentially desire, but then there's a battle. Is that a positive thing or a negative thing? And so the term desire determines if you think, some people think, well, she had an evil desire, so the husband has to dominate her, so or rule over her. So it's sort of the way some want to read it, and it's vital to the way they want to read it. Is, if you read the desire as an awful desire, as a bad thing, then the man needs to rule over her, and so it's a compensation by God for her being so evil in her desire towards her man. So that is the traditional way. It's distorted because there's all kinds of crazy translations. But this is the one up here. The husband will be your desire is correct. It's simply, that's all it says. So but now we got to see, is that a negative or positive, in order to interpret the second part, because it does not have any explanatory word connected to the word desire, so that you would know for sure. Okay, well, this guy's Paul Facey, and his "It's Good to Be a Man." He's a Christian who believes it's really good to be the men, because we don't have to be subservient. The women have to be subservient to us. So that's how he views it. Okay, and he's a shameless person. He's pro patriarchy. Christopher Paul Facey. And this is a 2021 article he did. Genesis 3:16, is patriarchy a curse of the fall? Okay, so he's going to say yes, it is. Just so you know, but we need to see opposing arguments in order to see how strong they are, or where are their weaknesses, and we'll show. And sometimes it's the best way to know what the right point is because let somebody try to make it from their point of view and see what they have to ignore or downplay, and then where their weaknesses are, and then where the strength of the text is to understand what it means. So the idea of going back and forth is a very important way of studying a passage. You want to see from both views how something is looked at. So he says men have a right to rule over women, but he concedes that God did not originally make women subject to man. Hence, I infer the Garden of Eden was the ideal, meaning it was, this is me, an equal partnership ruling over earth, neither man nor woman ruling over the other. And if you compare how Jesus analyzed the law of divorce, he said, yes, it was allowed to you, but this was not God's intention from the beginning. Okay. So what's going on in Eden is where Jesus is telling us we want to get back to the way it was in the beginning. Okay. So let's continue. And I think we've already covered some of this before. It's all so there's a series of things that will happen that are avoidable. that are not, it's not a curse that you can't avoid, but you could be avoiding them. So you might have pain in childbirth, okay, but you could, through medical techniques, avoid that, right? There's no reason. God didn't say you must suffer this, and this is doesn't call it a curse, so it's not a curse. It's just something you can resist if you want. And he says you're going to have thorns and thistles, and God actually contemplates that you're going to have to remove thorns and thistles. So even though that's the land's going to have that problem, you will have to do weeding and farming. So as this article says by Philip Payne, or book, it says people should not foster, but rather alleviate the consequences of the fall, including the husband's rule over his wife. So it's the same category. It's not a curse. Didn't say the word curse in relation to that. Okay, and then we've gone through this already. So I want to get this up to this point. So this is where we pick up from last time. So again, this is It's Good to Be a Man website, pro patriarchy all the way. Yay, men, yay, men. So this is guys really over the top, if you ask me a little bit. But he actually thoughtfully presents the argument. He doesn't do it completely correctly, and that's where we're going to find what does he not do right? What does he omit or try to obscure? And here we're going to see this is an issue. And the key to understanding how the words "and he will rule over you" has been misconstrued, you have to know what the word desire is construed by these same people. And so when you read the words, so all it says is, and his desire, her desire is to her man. That's what it says. But they've done everything they can to change that around and distort it. And he's going to do it by looking at the words and their word meanings and claim a comparison to Cain and Abel, where there's a similar issue of desire and a similar issue of rule. So he says, but it isn't true. So we're going to get into that. Okay, so here we go. The Hebrew word teshukwa, used of the desire that the woman will have for her husband, has a primary meaning of a passionately negative urge. Do you think it's primary, ladies and gentlemen? No. It's one way of looking at it. It's not primary or secondary. So he's already trying to skew things that we know it has a primary meaning. No, actually, it doesn't have a primary meaning. It just simply means desire, because actually, of the three usages, two of the three usages in the Bible are desire in a sexual sense. This one, and because it's between a husband and wife. I mean, what's the most likely word meaning to say her desire shall be to her man? That is talking about a sexual nature. She will have a sexual desire for her man. So, and that has not changed from pre-fall to post-fall. So that's what's really going on. And the other meaning we shall see from the Book of Solomon is it's clearly the same word is being used for sexual desires. We all know the Song of Solomon is a romantic piece in the Bible. So he is misleading, and so that's his first weakness. So we're going to stick that into his eyes, and we're going to make him read the Solomon passage in a minute. So he's going to say it's going to have a passionately negative urge, and that's exactly how this has been misconstrued and mistranslated for centuries. And even the Jews started this whole practice, and the Christians just got better at it. Although some commentators take a positive view. Some. Well, because it does have a positive meaning in the context, because it's sexual. It's clearly, obviously, referring to the sexual activity between the man and the woman, and she will be interested in it. Most, including his Payne, documents some egalitarians. So his enemies are the egalitarians, just so you know. So most, he says, even Payne has admitted, Payne has admitted, he claims, and he doesn't provide any proof of that, so I don't accept it. You don't prove it, you don't get it. So, but even if he admitted it, wouldn't mean I have to agree to it either. But I would consider it more seriously. But he doesn't give me any serious evidence of this. So he claims Payne agrees that it's negative, and I don't concede that. Usually, it is understood as a desire to dominate. So now he's saying that it's ordinarily understood. And what does he mean, in Hebrew or by the translators? Oh, by the translators who have biases, who want this to come out the way Paul paints the picture it's supposed to come out. No, the way this has to be understood is, what does the word tusukwa mean? And that's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Aside from its simple lexical meaning, there is a second, very compelling reason for this. Tusukwa is used only 3 times in the Hebrew Scriptures. Keep that in mind, 3 times, with the second use occurring in a very similar passage, hard on the heels of the first. And he's going to tell you to compare Genesis 3:16, which is what we're talking about. Speaking of Eve, Eve will have desire to her man. And then he's going to compare it to Genesis 4:7, where it speaks of Cain's sin, which reads literally, and to you is its desire, and you must rule over it. But he doesn't tell you the context of Cain. Cain wants to kill his brother, and that's his desire. And God's telling him, you must rule over it. You must suppress your desire to kill your brother. So this is nothing like a wife towards a husband. If I said, you, wife, will have a desire for your husband, that's really what it's saying in Genesis 3:16. What in common does that have with having a desire to kill your brother? Remember, Cain is jealous of Abel, gets an offering, and God shows favor to Abel. Cain's offering was not approved by God. So he's jealous now, and he wants to kill his brother. And God speaks directly to Cain. Just by the way, God can speak to people who aren't prophets, right? So he speaks to Cain. You'd think that would shake him up, but he still goes ahead and tries to. He does kill his brother Abel. So the point is that this is nothing like, the usage here is nothing like, and not the same context as a husband and wife relationship. But he's going to claim it's even stronger connection than that connection. So let's take a look. But what we need to know is that her desires to a husband, and the commentators of common sense point out this is huge. This makes a whole kinds of difference to determine what kind of desire she has to her husband. If it just simply said you would have a desire, and it's vague, and it doesn't direct it anywhere, you wouldn't know what it means necessarily. But by saying it's to her husband, to your husband will be your desire. It's saying he's your husband, not just your man, your husband. It's pointing to a sexual connection. The word husband is a man plus something else. He serves a secondary role of a sexual relationship that you're having with your man, your husband. Okay, so that's why it's wrong. This guy, it's too good to be a man. It's did I say it's too good to be a man? It's good to be a man. That's his website. Now, by contrast, the desire of Cain is to kill his brother. These two things can't be more different. So, but here's what he argues. So we need to always hear the opposing argument. The statements are obviously parallel. That means Genesis 3 and the Cain and Abel story are parallel. Not just in the words that they use, nor only in their structure, but also in what they're saying. The subject has a desire towards another person. Now, think about that. Did Cain's desire to kill his brother mean he had a desire towards another person in the same sense that Eve had a desire for her husband? Absolutely not. But he doesn't tell you. See, he doesn't. So what you're supposed to do at that point is then provide a proof. Then say Eve had a desire to her husband, Cain had a desire for his brother. So the only way to make those parallel is he had a homosexual desire for his brother. That's not what it's saying. He has a desire to kill his brother. That's what God's talking about. So these are the absolute opposites of each other, not even congruent with each other. So then he says, even the syntax of the clauses in the Hebrew text are identical. Well, I'm not surprised. There's just so many ways you can use the word desire, right? Adjusted for differences in the subject and object. That doesn't prove anything. It is hard to imagine how Moses could have been more obviously signaled a theological connection between these two passages. Yes, I couldn't imagine how he could get it any more different. One's a guy wanting to kill his brother, and the other is a woman wanting to have sexual relations with her husband. I think Moses made this as clear as day. These are two opposite situations and not to be connected to each other. But somehow he doesn't see it. You see, you're going to see what you want to see. But again, how do you if we reach our opinion without looking at the opposing point of view, we ourselves may not realize we are giving into bias. So we need to hear the hardest arguments for the other side in order to figure out, are they telling the truth? Then we concede it. If they're not, or they're exaggerating, we expose it. And that's what he's done here. So they're not obviously connected theologically. So the desire of sin in Genesis 4. Now, notice what he's done here. Now, Genesis 4 is different, right? This desire is the sin to kill somebody. But the desire of Eve is to have love, make love with her husband, right? So one is a sin, but now what he's going to try to do is impose that structure of that was a desire for sin, that what she's doing is has desire for sin too. But the only way you could say that is if God actually said something to imply it was sin, but he does nothing to imply that at all. However, the context of Genesis 4 and Cain and Abel, it's clear. Cain wants to kill his brother, and he does, and he ends up murdering him. And he has to wear the mark of Cain because God's going to actually protect Cain after that, so nobody can kill him by having the mark of Cain on his head. So the point is that these are two. Her desire is not a sin. It's never depicted as a sin, and it's just this man's willful desire that it be deemed a sin. Her desire is sinful rather than neutrally described with no connotations at all, and obviously meaning the husband wife relationship is the desire she wants. So anyway, so he says the desire of sin in Genesis 4 instructs us in how Moses intended that we understand the desire of Eve in Genesis 3. So he's saying we need to infer hers is an evil desire. And that's exactly how the Pharisees do this. So this is a Pharisaic conclusion. And the reason, and so I want to point this out right here, is because of Paul's conclusions, and he wants to come to the defense, it's good to know that Paul is still a Pharisee in his mind in Acts, and he even says, "I am a Pharisee in a court trial," to try to get off on a charge there. And he claims, I believe in eternal life, and then that causes a split in the Sanhedrin. So he's trying to get off saying that. So okay, he's a Pharisee through and through, and its proof is this whole passage. He has a Pharisee idea that the woman is sinned by having a desire, and that's, you're going to see, this is how the Pharisees get to it. We're going to get to the Talmud, which is the Pharisees' documentation post Christ, but it is a repository of Pharisee doctrine. So we'll get to that. It is of such a nature as to be overpowering and corrupting. Now Eve is supposed to be overpowering and corrupting, just as Cain's desire to kill his brother, a desire to be illicitly dominate. Now we're inventing things completely. There was nothing about domination. It says her desire will be to her husband, period, and uses the word husband. So, you can imagine all kinds of evil things only by what? Distortion and using a disparate text. And we're going to show you the text that actually aligns with this, which is in Song of Solomon. This fits seamlessly with it because being a curse, and it's not even a curse. So he misses that. The Bible, this passage uses the word curse twice, for the serpent and for the land, but never did God say that her desire was a curse, or or that the man will rule over her was a curse. It was just a fact of life, and that she just like childbirth, she could do things to avoid all the pain of childbirth, and so on. And the man having thorns and thistles was just a condition he would have to deal with, but he was allowed to clean them up too. So there were conditions that would change, but were not curses that they were not allowed to change. Or basically it's God's will. No matter what, you're going to suffer. You can't do anything to help yourself. Okay, so he's really making a lot of mistakes so far, right? Exegetically and theologically, we would be obtuse to read Eve's desire in Genesis 3 as a positive affection rather than a corrupted grasping. No, I'd say you would be obtuse to conclude that Eve's desire for her husband in Genesis 3 is not a positive affection, and instead is a corrupt grasping, equal to the Cain intent to kill his brother. Okay, just completely. So these are completely. What did he say up here? He said they were parallel, but they're not. They're distinct and contrasting, actually. Okay. So, I like this book, the Book of Eden. It'll comment on this. So he actually makes a point. The tusakwa, and the other word is to your husband. So the answer to the question is the desire is for the husband, right? And then he asks the question that I'm addressing here. So this is now, let's listen to somebody speaking on the side that says, hey, this is a positive affection, and then see how they construe or defend that position. So let's see what they say. What kind of desire is this? There is every reason to assume this is a healthy desire, as she had before the attack, and God says her desire is still the same. So that was actually significant. It's a present tense. So God says to her, your desire is to your husband. So what it doesn't say shall be. So in other words, if something's changed from before, it would be future tense. So, and then you could maybe say, if it's a shall be, you could say, well, she didn't have this feeling before, but now she does. Then you might have that argument about she desires to dominate, but it doesn't. It's actually a present tense is construction, and therefore it would be simply exactly what it was before the fall. So nothing changed. Your desire is to your husband. And that's a very very observant comment by the author, and his name is Bruce Fleming, but his wife Joy was a co-contributor to the work, and that's at page 99 of his book, The Book of Eden, and I recommend it. It's a very good book. Okay, some have attempted to compare her desire in 3:16 to another desire depicted in the word picture in Genesis 4:7, and that's where Cain and Abel is. So let's see what he has to say about that. But the verse in 4:7 is outside of the tightly constructed chiasm of which 3:16 is a part. So he has this whole thing. His wife found this out when you compare 3:16 to another passage. They're kind of this. They're intended to reflect each other back and forth, and so that amplifies how to read and construe this section. But I'm not going to go into that; it's too complex. So we're going to just discount that reason. But there are more reasons that we won't be discussing. The desire mentioned in Genesis 4 is only part of the next passage. What we learn from the occurrence is that the word desire, tushukwa, is not necessarily a term reserved for human affection, because it is used in a non-sexual way in the account of Cain and Abel. So he is pointing at the same argument I was making earlier. I mean, it's obvious. Your desire will be for your husband. Talking to the wife means it's sexual. But if you said the desire of Cain towards his brother Abel, it's clearly not sexual, and it's murderous. And by the way, that was at page 99 of Book of Eden. Okay, so now some translators, the Alter translation, Robert Alter translation of Genesis from 1996, I think it was, he actually just flat out changes it to shall be your longing. And I actually think you should usually leave the word the way it really is. It's the word desire in Hebrew. So longing is a type of desire, and that would show it's a positive affection. But I think it's also fair to just leave it the way it was and then let people figure it out what it means. But he's leaning the text towards the positive affection view. And I'm mentioning it only because it does prove that you could construe it literally to mean either desire or longing in this context, because it's a wife towards a husband. Okay. Now, but now we're going to go back to our friend there. He's the one, It's Good to Be a Man website. So he has made a couple of mistakes. He's tried to argue that most of the time it has a positive, a negative view. This is a word desire, and he's tried to infer it means here desire to dominate. That would be negative, right? And then he says it's used only 3 times in the Hebrew Scriptures, with the second use occurring in a very similar passage. And we showed you it's not similar. So what is the other third passage, which he should have told us about? And this is key. He omits telling us. So one of the things you have to do when you're presenting argument, you should present the verse that the other side should know about. In other words, you're trying to make us make a material decision between just 2 verses, but what's the third one that you're concealing from us? And why are you concealing it from us? Well, here it is. It's in Book of Eden, page 99. The word tusukwa is used only one other time in the Old Testament. It is helpful to our understanding because it describes another human. In Song of Solomon 7:10, tusukwa is used to describe Solomon. His lover refers to Solomon's desire in these words: I am my beloved's, and his desire is towards me. There is no negative connotation to his desire for his lover. Okay, so this is and it's actually a positive connotation. So there you go. This woman in this picture is happy that her man has a desire for her. Okay, so it's completely used in a positive way. So we know now there's at least one positive way. This would be Solomon. And we know there's one negative way, which would be Cain's desire to kill his brother. So now, between which of these two do you think makes the most common sense? Just sitting there as a neutral observer, if I said, I'm going to read a passage that says, "Eve, you will have your desire is for your man, for your husband." So, Eve, your desire is for your husband. Which view is being conveyed? The one of Solomon 7:10, which is a positive one, or is it the kind of murderous view that we read in the Cain and Abel story? So he voted the guy who wants to believe it's good to be a man and be in a patriarchal situation where I'm in charge. He wants to read it that it's similar to Cain and Abel when it's completely inapposite. That's like that has nothing in common, and it has everything in common with Song of Solomon 7:10. So you have a choice. The reader here, the listener here, you have a choice. You can try to decide. I think it's more like Cain and Abel. I mean, it's obviously an evil desire for her husband, but it doesn't say that, and the word desire does not jump off the page and tell you it's evil, because you can see here, Solomon 7:10, there is such a thing as sexual desire, to conveyed in a very positive sense of the woman who's the man is attracted to, enjoying the fact that her man desires his desire is towards me. That's clearly positive. So that's a difficulty in reading this word negatively. And let me make this clear: the Pharisees read this negatively and have poisoned everything because they were a patriarchal mentality, and then tried to imbue something in the scripture. And now you're going to see the impact on translations. So here's Book of Eden again, page 99, is going to talk about how this Pharisee doctrine, they don't say Pharisee doctrine, but that doctrine poisoned our social fabric with the idea that desire of Eve in that situation was a negative. So let's listen to what they say. It is not so easy for modern readers to simply recognize her desire as her affection. This is because many, many people for 700 years, and I don't know why they're saying 700 years, maybe that's the historical framework, but you can go all the way back to the Pharisees and the Talmud, which we will do. Um, but he says, or his wife is co-writing this, or seems to be co-writing. Many, many people for 700 years and more have identified her as a shameless temptress. I guess what she's saying is, from what we can see in literary in Christian culture. Okay. But I would say that's not correct. You also have Paul. He's acting like she's a bad person. And remember, he's making it sound like she's the only one who sinned, which we will get to whether that was correct or not, because he says she sinned. He wasn't deceived. She was deceived. And it was her transgression essentially alone. So we're going to look into that. So it really, it goes all the way back to Paul. You have to acknowledge that. And it goes to the Pharisees, and then it comes all the way through Western culture with Christians reading Paul, and then it just gets amplified, and you now have patriarchy openly defended, even though it's contrary to what the text actually says, Genesis 3, verse 16. And have identified her as a shameless temptress of ravening beast who led the man to his death and deserved a curse. And she didn't even get a curse. If that were truly the case, then in line 3 of 316, we could expect God to talk about how terrible her heart has become. Yeah, so there's some missing things here. Is like, you can read the context of Genesis 4 about Cain and Abel, and you know that Cain wants to kill Abel, right? He's jealous, and his heart is, upset. He's hurt that his sacrifice wasn't accepted. And now he wants to kill his brother. So God did not help us by putting any words to show that she had any terrible feelings towards her husband. In fact, he uses a word, desire, that would be used normally, appropriately, for meaning a sexual, physical desire. Okay, and so now we'll get to the next part. Notice the confusion that the following translations reveal when it comes to line 3 in Genesis 3, verse 16. Many translations assume her desire was somehow bad. They can't agree on what way her desire was bad, but they freely invent interpretations of the meaning of desire. This is page 100 of the Book of Eden by Bruce Fleming. Again, a book I recommend. Where did all these ideas come from? Remember, the two Hebrew words in line 3 say simply, your desire is to your husband. And the meaning is simple and straightforward. She has not turned against her husband. She still desires him. So that's all it says. But listen to how the translations do this. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband. English Standard Version. English Standard Version. I mean, that's considered one of the top versions right now, and they've done a great job normally. But this word is not there. That's invented, and the meaning is the opposite, as I showed you. You will desire to control your husband. New Living Translation. And by the way, that's a translation that tries to make things easier to understand. Now they've just added something that's false into the text. So you can't trust a New Living either. Since your trust is turning toward your husband, International Standard Version. I don't find that bad. Your trust is turning toward your husband, but that means like it's something future, and it would imply she distrusted her husband. So there is something insidious about that and false, because it's a present tense is toward your husband, not turning and not some future action. And then the Net Bible says you will want to control your husband. Wow. Where's that? Now God's Word translation, God's Word translation says, yet you will long for your husband. Now that's okay. So I guess Mr. Fleming wasn't showing you all the bad translations. So some say that, but you know what? I think his point is it's the future tense, will long. It's not. It's a present tense, is for your husband. It's a desire. So don't change even that much, because that sends out an implication she didn't have a desire for her husband earlier, and now she does or will. So this is wrong. And maybe even alter. See what I was saying earlier. Alter should have just left the word desire and not try to embellish it with words about longing. Just say her desire is to her husband. Let the people figure that out. It has its own connotation. Next is the Brenton Septuagint translation. So the Greek Septuagint that was created in the like around 257 BC. Let's see what it says. And thy submission shall be to thy husband. So this is a reflection of Judaic, Pharisaic or pre-Pharisaic views. And the Pharisees, I think, actually only come into existence about 90 BC. So that party got favored by some ruler in the area, regional ruler, and then they became, and they were only favored, by the way. This is a book in I can't remember the author's name, but it's Peter pays the price for Paul. I forget what it was, but anyway, so they only came about in 90 BC, and they were very good advocates, very good orators, and that's why they were favored. So that's what's going on at pre-Pharisee even, so that it's already been mistranslated to support a patriarchal view of the verse and how to use it to the advantage of the men. And then the Dewey Rhymes, now this would reflect Catholic. It's a Catholic translation. And thou shalt be under thy husband's power. And I don't understand how that's translating the words. What it sounds like is they got rid of the word desire, and they just simply say, you shall be under your husband's power. Now, we know that it says, and he shall rule, he will rule you, or something like that. But what happened to the desire? So they just even left it out here. So there's so much distortion that goes on. We are going to stop here and pick up on episode 4, beginning with where we're going to now show you the Pharisee doctrine is reflected in the Talmud, where there's called the 10 curses of Eve, even though there's not a single curse. They're going to say they can find 7 in Genesis 3:16 when there's 0. And then they're going to try to comment. But one thing I just want to point out to you before we leave is, see, they even understood the desire there is sexual and is positive. Yet your urge shall be for your husband, and it will reflect in your heartache felt by a woman when her husband sets out on a journey. So they clearly understood it was a sexual desire. So they did not fault her for that. That whole idea of demonizing her as a sexual temptress and all that other kind of stuff is actually a not. Paul doesn't suggest that either, by the way. It's a more medieval Christian viewpoint that Eve was the temptress and she was the seductress and all this kind of other stuff. So that came from the Christians. But the Jewish people actually did get that right because what? They know Hebrew and they know the Song of Solomon and they know the meaning of the words. So I just wanted to add that in there before we get, we're going to postpone more further in-depth discussions of the Talmud. And we're going to then finally get closer, I hope, to show you that Paul made a mistake saying that Adam was not deceived and only Eve was deceived and that Eve is the only sinner. No, he either was deceived or he was actually deliberately defying God. So when Eve hands the fruit to him, does he not know that's the fruit from the tree? His answer and excuse God shows he knew when he took it. It was from the forbidden fruit of the tree, and he took it anyway. So his sin arguably is deliberate, or at worst, or at best, it's just deceived. But it's either he was deceived and sinned that way, which is possible, or more likely is he acted deliberately and Eve doesn't even say anything to him. She says, "Here, eat this," and his excuse clearly shows that he knew it was from the fruit of the forbidden tree. So we're going to get into that. So Paul is wrong, and that's his reason for these rules that women can't teach and have any authority over men because of that. That is the reason he gives for why those principles are true. So if his reasons are wrong, then the principle he's teaching is wrong. We'll get into that hopefully next time. It's taking some more time than I thought to get to this point. Okay. God bless. Take care. Ciao. Bye.